cyber attacks aren't going to follow Geneva Convention, Article 52, like we're not going to attack schools or hospitals or whatever. They're going to go after low-hanging fruit. And unfortunately, the SLED side of the business, they're constrained by money and grant availability and what they have to address their blind spots, right? So unfortunately, the regular person is going to be impacted. You need to be very careful about how you set up your cybersecurity, having a good EDR, having a good NDR, having a good network performance management, having SOC and NOC tools that will talk to each other is important. So like you sort of have to architect it very thoughtfully. And that browser has, the way that people work remotely now, has become your new office space. Even for like Google Docs, for example, like that's on a browser. Like, it's all this information. Figure skating taught me a lot of things. Served me well in my military career and serves me well in cybersecurity. One of those things is failure. You got to talk about failure and resilience and the ability to continue. Being able to show up every day, day after day, and learning from your mistakes and learning from what could have been done better. Always asking yourself, what could I have done differently for a better outcome? And then competing with yourself. Not competing with others, but competing with yourself to raise that bar every day.
Today, I have with me a U.S. Air Force combat veteran who commanded hundreds of personnel in Qatar, earned a Harvard Kennedy School Fellowship, and somehow was also a figure skating champion. You might think it's some unrealistic novel plot, but it's Sarah Cleveland. She's turned her military precision into cybersecurity excellence at ExtraHop, where she leads federal strategy for one of the most innovative network security companies in the game. Sarah's journey is anything but ordinary. Welcome to the Be Fearless podcast, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to join your show. I also want to acknowledge your contribution to our community in cybersecurity is not small. So this is really an honor to be able to have some time with you.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it. There's not very many people that I get to interview that have been in all the same locations I've been in the Middle East and in the Far East and, around the world. So it's a great honor to talk to you as well. I think it's, we have some common experiences in different places, but in the same regions and supporting the same commands in some cases. So it's nice to have you on the show. I'm super excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and of course, thank you for your service.
Oh, well, and thank you for yours, because it is an all-encompassing team. Contractors, civilians, military. We all had a mission for national security. So, not many contractors or civilians will raise their hand to go to the places that we went.
That's true. So anyway, let's talk about your military career and how you transitioned from military to civilian workforce, right? So you were a senior director of C4 Cyber. Can you paint us a picture of what the responsibility of national security looked like day to day and how it shaped your leadership style?
Yeah, so that particular job was my second to last job in the military. And it was Joint Task Force, NCR, National Capital Region, on our nation's bad days. And on our nation's good days, it was the G6 for the Military District of Washington, which the significance of being a G rather than a J is that it was an Army cyber position. And I was in the Air Force. So clearly I was given an opportunity that was kind of unique. But that Joint Task Force National Capital Region part was the JTF was created after 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, it became clear that they needed to have a unit that would be able to respond in that region to bring together first responders, fire rescue, police, park police, FEMA, and be able to pull all those assets together under a unified command to respond to that. So they did that under 9/11. They oh gosh, we need to be better prepared. So that unit was developed under Northcom to do that response. So while I was there, the day-to-day is inauguration, parades, all the fun stuff, right? Front row seats to the Old Guard, Tomb of the Unknown, all the wreath lanes. It was pretty cool. But then some of the things that did occur that were activated by the JTF were COVID. So got to work a lot with FEMA and all the hospital assets in the area and that sort of thing. So that was interesting for sure. But a lot of the assets that we had were kind of unique. I don't know if you've seen the movie Dan Aykroyd, Stripes.
Yeah.
Right? So we had so we had a motorhome that was outfitted like with it's a mobile command post, server room, everything in this mobile home. So like we called it the War Wagon. It was pretty cool to have stuff like that. SUVs with satellite dishes bolted to the top. So it was pretty neat to be able to have some of those toys that you could play with that. But really, it was a lot of exercising to meet the nation's worst day. For example, the unit that I was with was activated under the JTF when the helicopter and the airplane collided last February. So that would have been one of the types of examples that we would respond to.
Right. I think that most folks won't understand what C4 is, and C4 Cyber in particular. Do you want to give a little background on C4 and, what your mission is there?
Yeah. So like a lot of folks think C4 is dynamite. So command, control, computers, and communications. They've, I think, changed one of the C's now to cyber because communications is now like an outdated term. So that's the cyber part. But you get to work with the cyber, making sure the cyber backbone is there for those people to be able to respond. So under that, you're responsible for the ability to knit all those communications together and coordinate all those actions, because without communications, without being able to communicate from the command center to the edge, you're not able to coordinate as well as you would be able to normally.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to execute your command and control, right?
Right.
Especially across joint task force. Being able to communicate across, the different components of the military and have a single action, a single command and control structure is incredibly important. And then, of course, cyber, plays a big part of that as well.
Yeah, and you do a lot of planning for failure, right? So PACE plans, right? Primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. You do plan for the comms to not be available. You have mission type orders. So, having those policies, procedures in place, TTPs, are at the behest of the J6 or the A6, the lead communicator, lead cyber operator, because they want to know, like, if I can't get a hold of this person, what do I do next?
Yeah, for sure. I think that I've been on many cybersecurity exercises and actually in actual response situations where the person that we're expected to have the answer to make a decision is on vacation, or they're somewhere else, or they're not, you can't connect with them. And then everyone's somewhat wondering, well, what do I do? Definitely the work that I do inside of corporate entities is not at the same level as, military kind of exercises and those kinds of things as well. But it kind of presents the same kind of problem where are you going to wait on making a decision? Can you wait on making a decision? And if you can't wait, what do you do? And then how do you know you're making the right decision? I think having those, contingencies and understanding what you do in these different situations, I think is incredible. You need to have those plans so that you can respond effectively and, protect whatever it is that you're protecting, whether it's a asset that you have in the field in the military context, or if it's a manufacturing plant that you have in Philippines, whatever that is, you got to know what it is that you can do to protect.
Yeah. And I think that plays into one of the questions that you have here, but in the military, we calculate risk all the time. And the way we calculate risk is maybe a little different than how they do in the commercial side. So that's one of the things that's like kind of different, but like we get really good at calculating risk. The other thing is your policies. Like everything starts with a policy or an basic understanding of what are we doing here. And without those policies, like even when you start talking about like zero trust, like without those policies in place, pen to paper, like everything else is a waste of time.
No, agreed. I think that I'm much more threat driven than I am risk driven. Just my makeup. I'd rather contain a threat that I see versus think of ones that may or may not happen. That's just my practical nature of it. I think one of the first things you do, right, from a CISO perspective anyway, is that you need to communicate something out to people. What do you expect them to do? Right. And policy is great, but policy also takes time to create. Sometimes it's just send guidance, right? Like if I don't have an answer for you, or I don't have a policy, just send something out so that people can have some idea of what the expectations are, right? Just send out a guideline, right?
Provide direction.
Provide direction, right? And that way people have some idea of what their box is, what's inside their box, what's outside their box. And then you get more legitimize that box, those guidelines, by putting the right kind of policies in place. Or if you need to update policies, you do that kind of activity, again, so that you understand what the direction is. Like, what is it that is expected from everybody?
Right.
And, when it's all said and done, policies don't protect.
No.
Right? It's people that are protecting things. It's their technology that they have in place to protect things. It's the configuration of that technology to do that. But having those policies and directions and that guidance in place so that people know how to protect, I think is so necessary.
And I probably use the word policy a little bit broadly in that respect, but having ground rules, right, when you're operating keeps basic sense of safety and security. But knowing your mission for sure is like, and when you start talking like CISSM, right, the management aspect of it, like you have to consider like security, but not to the point where you unplug the computer, right, or unplug yourself from the network, because that's the most secure network ever, is the one that's not used.
Yes. It's
so
also not providing any value.
No. And we're not here for, and this is one of the things I would talk to my new airmen about, is we're not here for us. We're here to accomplish what's on the end of the spear. Right? So we're not the important piece. We're important in getting it done, but we are not, don't exist for us.
You mean you're talking about the computers and communication parts, right? The cyber.
Yeah, the cyber part. If we make it so secure it's unuseful, it's unuseful. We're unuseful.
Yes, absolutely. Early in my work with the U.S. Navy, we definitely had folks that would take like the letter of the like STIGs, and they would make everything compliant with the STIG. What's that? Security Technical Implementation Guidelines. And we had a workstation that was built out, and this is just a story, of a system that was secure. I mean, it hit all the STIG items, right? And the system was absolutely not functional. I mean, you couldn't do anything on it. You couldn't open up a browser. You just couldn't do anything with it. And that particular person took the approach that, look, this is what they want. This is what, it was an engineer, right? It's like, this is what the military wants, is they want this system to be secure. And I'm like, well, is it really that they want it to be secure? Yes, they want it to be secure, but if it doesn't work, then it's you might as well not even have it, right? And that's not really what it is that we're trying to do here. We're trying to balance risk and reward. And as we start moving our systems that we're deploying into getting their authority to operate, we're itemizing all of those things that are deficiencies in that system. It's not so much that you have deficiencies, it's that you know what that deficiency is and that you have a mitigation for it. It's more important to know. The worst thing you can be in the military context, from my perspective, and I'd love to hear yours, is that you don't know what your vulnerabilities are.
Yeah, right? It's the unknown unknowns.
Right. The unknown unknowns. Right. And then, people coming to you and telling you, well, you have this deficiency, that deficiency. That doesn't give confidence to your leadership that, you have things under control. Right. And again, even in the state of deficiencies, it's important that, you have a sense of the control. You're not going to be able to cover everything. I mean, we have 0 days. We have breaches that happen all the time. It's definitely a different mindset inside a military organization that is in corporate America. I think this is kind of one of the questions I, have for you is like, you've worked with agencies from the Pentagon to various federal departments. What's the biggest misconception that private sector cybersecurity companies have about selling to the government? I mean, this is, along that line, right, is what is it about these private sector cybersecurity companies that and when they're selling to the government, what's the misconceptions that they're having about it?
So I think there's a couple. There's a few technical ones, and then there's another just practical one. So the technical ones, I would say, like the importance of integrations, like looking at what the federal government already has and being vendor agnostic and being able to integrate with those things like CDM dashboards. So the vendor environment needs to be good at working together with each other, right, to meet that requirement. So I think vendors might not understand that they might end up working with a pseudo competitor because it's already in there. If you want to get into that environment, you're going to have to be able to work together with those pieces, and in some cases, a product might be competing, and in some cases they might be working together. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. And the other one is a lack of understanding from vendors on how government funding actually works, right? The different colors of money, procurement, OEM, RDT&E, each one of them having those strict rules. And then on top of that, I don't think there's a great understanding about many of the DoD organizations and how they work with their 1-year money, 2-year money, which means that timing has to be like, no matter how good your product is, you might not be in there because you just were 2 weeks too late.
Right.
So if you don't align your engagement with budget cycles, even the best product won't get purchased. For example, like if your office has 1-year O&M funds available, they may need to obligate those dollars before the end of the fiscal year, like several months before, like in July. So hitting them up for UFR time in August is too late.
Right. I agree. I think there's two important points there. One is that in the military side, we always had these like concepts of operations, and then we had these systems that we would define, and we would have a defined system, and that system would have a name. And then we'd go out to procurement and we'd try to find a product that would help us meet those design criteria. And, again, sometimes you could do it with one vendor, right? But no matter what happened, we would never follow it up with, we're using Tenable, or we're using this tool, or we're using that tool. We always call it whatever its concept was, or whatever its design component was. And then if things changed and we went from vendor A to vendor B, that system would still be called whatever it is. It's just that the underlying technology might change, or it might be augmented with other technologies, but that system would not change its name.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Because I think on the military side, we work in terms of a system component. It's something that means something to our mission. It's important, but it's not, we're not doing it because that vendor has a good name or a good brand.
Yeah.
From my perspective, anyway.
Yeah, no. And if you like sitting with my uniform on, if you know that this is going to work, but you're probably not going to get selected because it's economically deficient, then you try your best to write a sole source, right? A differentiating piece, but like many times it doesn't, it's like technically acceptable, at lowest bidder, technically acceptable. My understanding is like with the ESI now, things are changing a little bit. Hopefully this will benefit the military, the DoD, the federal agencies to get things that will actually work. Because then you go back to that ecosystem, right? me being in uniform, I know what's going to work in that ecosystem. I know the biddy sits. You've worked with Cisco before. And with the biddy sits infrastructure upgrades, they were trying to get us, it bid us later. They sold us a bunch of Huawei. And because it was lowest bidder, technically acceptable, you get what you pay for, which is a big third-party vulnerability. So I think they're getting away from it with some of the more recent things that are going down. But we'll see how that all shakes out in the next 12 months. Hopefully we'll get better products for the federal government.
Yeah, we all want that, right?
Yeah.
I understand the procurement processes and why they want technically accepted best price kind of options. But again, that's not always, the best thing for the government. I mean, just because I was working in, telco in Japan and had some interactions with the U.S. government on Open RAN and, trying to find solutions that were not Huawei, countries that we have tight alliances with, we definitely were looking for ways to not, because Huawei in particular, they have like great financing options, low price, but it's not necessary that we want to send, data streams back to China. Right. So, in that context, that's definitely the Western point of view on it, but it makes it difficult for us to work. We have some things that work against us there with respect to, how patent law works and how these systems are done, that it makes it difficult. Anyways, that's a different kind of conversation.
Yeah, no, but it plays into that third-party vendor security that they start. There's a lot of discussion going on about it right now.
Sure. I imagine so.
We're doing some work with a federal agency that I can't say right now, but one of the questions is like, do you have any code written by a third-party vendor? Where does your hardware come from? Like, these things are now becoming questions that are becoming important. And to include too, like FedRAMP is becoming even probably more important than it was before. Like these ecosystems that companies are putting together that give you like zero trust. Are all the vendors in that ecosystem FedRAMPed? That's becoming questions that are getting asked, not like, oh, we'll just get this thing. So,
yeah, I think CISOs generally know that we depend on many third-party frameworks and libraries to implement products, right? Yeah. We know that happens. I think that one of the risks has been, especially in the open source community, which is where a lot of our code comes from, is from some sort of open source library.
Yeah.
I think the days of proprietary systems being all proprietary, those are pretty much done. There's no one's building from the ground up anymore.
Yeah.
And that's good, right? But at the same time, because of these open source libraries and whoever started the library may not be the best marketer and can't find funding, or maybe it's not something that's fundable or whatever. They get tired of managing their libraries and their frameworks, and they let other people come into their ecosystem. And a lot of open source communities don't have third-party risk management. They don't know if it's North Korea, China, someone else that's introducing code into the system, or sometimes they just transfer control of their library to some other party, maybe no money, just so that because they can't support it anymore, right?
Yeah, because it's not what they do.
Yeah, it's not what they do, right? And that is definitely something that we're seeing on the browser side. We do browser security, browser detection and response.
Yeah, like talk about something that's hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's hard.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing that we're seeing is that, we have extensions that, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of extensions are available for Chrome or Chromium kind of browsers. And then you have all these open source libraries that are being used. And what we're seeing is that these are, a lot of these libraries are being copied, right? And then redeployed in the web store. We're also seeing things, like these extensions are being taken over, meaning that they have a problem in their cyber controls, and they lose control of their code base, and then malicious code is then being deployed into extensions that people are running. And then we have another one where they're just transferring control of the extension to some other party. And then again, malicious code gets added to it. And this is something that we've seen in open source software for, decades now, probably. But, I don't think people are thinking about with respect to extensions and the code that they're running. In the US federal side, they are starting to ask those questions, like who is involved, where are these code bases, those kinds of things. But I think from a vendor perspective, it makes it a much trickier procurement cycle.
It does. I'm lucky that I'm with a company that is a US based, it's a smallish company. And I've met a good share of the engineers. So they're all here kind of deal. So, I'm lucky with that respect, but you start getting companies that are bigger. It's how do you even know? Right. And then the business that you're in with the browser, this is a nightmare to me.
Yeah. I think the nightmare, we were talking a little bit about network defense and response, NDR kind of product, the things that are on the wire. Right. And then you have EDR tools that are on the desktops. And then we have what we're introducing is browser textual response that's happening in the browser.
Yeah.
And I think one of the shifts in the industry has been the cloud. That changed how we do network defense altogether. Then we have SaaS products that are coming out like crazy, right? There's just so many SaaS products. And one of the things that we expound on that we think is an important part of cyber is understanding securing communications, right? We like to have point-to-point security and TLS security, and we like the encrypted channels. These are, again, probably things that are near and dear to our hearts coming from working on military networks. These are good things. But from how do you defend? How do you know if something's going wrong or right on the network? And how do you investigate it? I think that complexity of where it is that we are working in cloud and SaaS apps, where our people are working, in offices and remote at their homes or, at coffee shops, wherever they're working, hotels, that kind of blows up the number of places that we need to look at on the network. And if we can see it, can we actually see what's going on the network as it traverses our, control points? Tell me, how has that affected, you and your business?
Well, so I always joked about back to the NCR job, right? I joked about COVID was March 13th of 2020, where everybody's life changed, right? So I joked that in 24 hours, COVID did what I was trying to do for 2 years, right? But then it just opened up this whole can of worms of problems because you knew there was going to be problems, but you didn't know to what extent. And then overnight, it was our commercial backbone wasn't big enough to handle all the traffic. And then now everybody is using either their home computer or a computer that was issued, or they were issued a computer and they refused to use it, or their child was doing their homework on. You just didn't know. And I'm not sure we have a greater understanding of that now, but through EDR tools, yes, but I think these solutions for security are not one thing. And if one company says they can do it, you probably need to dig a little deeper because, what is that? If you think you can do everything well, you're doing nothing well.
Yeah.
So you need to be very careful about how you set up your cybersecurity, having a good EDR, having a good NDR, having a good network performance management, having SOC and NOC tools that will talk to each other is important. So you sort of have to architect it very thoughtfully. And that browser has the way that people work remotely now has become your new office space. Even me, our company is by and large mostly remote. So even for Google Docs, for example, that's on a browser, it's all this information. So you kind of have to bring it back down to data. What are you doing to protect the data? You can no longer necessarily protect the network. You got to protect the data type of thing. So it's just, this is why the community the cyber community is so important that we talk to each other, even if we're viewed as competitors, that we still talk to each other about the things that we are trying to solve.
Agreed.
And maybe that's a little altruistic on my part, but
well, I think it's not so much altruistic. I think it's very practical, meaning that one, being a CISO, haven't bought a lot of technology, haven't looked at a lot of technology. And kind of going back to what you said about even selling to federal, that everything needs to kind of integrate into a holistic whole, right? Each company has different problems, right?
Yeah.
And they have different systems that are important to them. Where that data is, again, I agree with you about follow your data, meaning that, there are a couple of things that are really important to CISOs. One is availability. Hey, keep things up and running. Let's not have a DDoS attack. Let's make sure people can, if you're a CSO, do your people have their laptops? Can they get to the systems? Those kinds of things. Do you want to have things stolen or, your office is broken into, et cetera? That's one thing, availability. The other part is like keeping your intellectual property safe, out of people's eyes, prevent espionage kind of risk, but also losing control of cardholder data or personal data, those kinds of things. These are things that are business limiting kind of things that you don't want to have happen in your environment. Those are kind of the things that are important to the CISO. Think about how they're going to protect the environment where the business is doing what the business needs to do. The technology systems are kind of following fast to kind of deliver on those business critical systems that they need. And then cyber comes around and they have to figure out, how do I secure it? Here's where my workforce is. Here's where my data centers are, if you have them anymore. And then finally, where is all my data and all of these little SaaS apps that are, that is the new way for IT to deploy into environments today, is to use a SaaS app. And I think it's great for vendors too, because it makes it a whole lot easier for us to manage upgrades and do everything that we need to do to keep customers happy.
To deliver.
Yeah. Right? But at the same time, it makes it harder for the cyber team, right, to control or to, I'm going to say control. And what I don't mean is batten down the hatches so bad that you don't have a system that's working, but control meaning that do you have that visibility that you need so that if things do go bump in the night, that you can respond to it effectively? Do you have those technologies that you bring all together? Yeah. And I just think in our world, I remember when most of our cyber technologies was network defense. It used to be it seemed like it was all firewalls and IPSs and those kinds of things that you had on the network.
It was pretty simple. You could draw it on a piece of paper with a house and a fence around it.
Absolutely. The old castle and moat strategy, right?
Right.
And then then we moved on to, we started, that got harder to penetrate. And then we kind of moved on to phishing and exploiting the Windows operating system, the operating system we have that our users are using. And now we've kind of moved into this different world where we don't know where anything is anymore. And we're accessing it all through the browser. And so the landscape's kind of been shifting. And like you said, if anyone's telling you they can do it all, they're probably not. You need to dig deeper. Yeah. And because I know that I thought that I was being protected by my network defenses and my endpoint defenses. But when I started looking at intellectual property protection and, insider threats, and I didn't really realize, I knew that we were buying a lot of SaaS products and those kinds of things, but I didn't really realize how much visibility I didn't have in the browser. And then and part of that was how much visibility I lost on my network defenses. And then what the limitations of EDR tools are and DLP tools on the endpoints are as well. And that's not even taking into control like BYOD, like you were talking about. There's so many attack surfaces to consider today as our businesses operate.
Yeah. And then now we're, moving into quantum, right?
Yes. I definitely, I remember telling this to someone maybe 10 years ago. And because they started talking about quantum many years ago, but I remember telling someone when quantum comes online, I think that's my time to retire. Right? I mean, just mentally, I don't know if I can jump from Turing machines to quantum computing. I don't know if I can make that move, right? But at the same time, the cryptography, the quantum safe cryptography stuff's kind of coming down, now. We have to prepare for that in advance as well. I think it's a very interesting, never static world that we live in. And going back to one of your points is like we need to work together, right? We need to work both in the vendor community, inside of our corporations, talking to other corporations, in our industries, but also outside of our industries, because some of the problems that we have now were already handled by different industries. Like some of the problems that I have in manufacturing, we've kind of solved those problems in telecom, some of those problems, right? And it's like, if I take some of what I've learned from telecom and bring it to manufacturing, now I'm leveling up. There's things that we learned in just non-OT systems in cyber that apply to OT systems, or could be applied. Those practicums can be applied there. But we need to look across industries as well. What are some good approaches to defending as our little cybersecurity journeys continue?
Yeah, because like we both talked about, those solutions don't lie with one technology.
Agreed.
Those solutions lie with all of us, as a community. And I mean, you representing EDR, me representing NDR, and then you've got different other things, identity, that you have to bring together. And as the landscape shifts, you're going to have to come up with new ways to respond to that. It's kind of like that three-legged stool. You can either have it fast, you can have it good, or you can have it cheap.
Right.
So
pick two.
Pick two. So I think with quantum, we're getting to that point where we're going to have to, as good Americans, get together and solve the problem.
Agreed. So, I'm going to ask you about your interview with the Register, and you had said that nation state hacking has become more in your face. What sorts of threats have you seen that you found creative or particularly challenging to handle?
So, it hasn't been proven that this is equated to a nation state, but there's discussion of it. But the Nevada deal that just occurred, I'm sure you're tracking that, crippling the state's websites, its phone systems, the DMV operations. But like I said, although attribution remains unconfirmed at the moment, it coincides with some of the tariffs. So, I think this shows how normal people can be impacted by certain activities. Even if it is shown to be like a crime family that has done this, it's probably supported by a nation state. So these cyber attacks aren't going to follow Geneva Convention, Article 52, like we're not going to attack schools or hospitals or whatever. They're going to go after low-hanging fruit. And unfortunately, the SLED side of the business, they're constrained by money and grants, grant availability, and, what they have to address their blind spots, right? So unfortunately, the regular person is going to be impacted. It's not necessarily going to be going after government. So I believe like in the coming years, we may see that this level of cyber operations aren't necessarily going to be impacting the federal government as much as it will the regular person trying to go to the bank and get their money.
Yeah, and I think that those frailties, inside of our state and local and education kind of systems, right? It seems like the news talks a lot about what's happening in the federal government.
Yeah.
A lot of what happens at that level isn't as impactful as what's happening in your state and your local government, right? I mean, those things are affecting you and what you're doing in that day, right? Yeah. Whether you have roads that work, or you have electricity, or you have phone service, or whatever those.
Or I had to take a day off to go get my driver's license, and now I can't.
Right.
And it's expired tomorrow. And what am I going to do?
But those frailties, can shake the faith of the people that are in those communities about the effectiveness of their government and those kinds of things. And those are things that we got to kind of watch for. And that's compounded with social media posts saying that, hey, we're ineffective, those kinds of things. Those can kind of shake how we feel about the government, right? And how we feel about our local leaders and how we feel about our approach to everything, right? I think we're going to see more of that. It's hard for me to believe that given the limited amount of funding in state and local governments on cyber in particular, that we're going to not see more of that in the future. I mean, I think it's just likely to occur. I mean, I know that we've had some conversations on our side with like state and local governments, and like you said, it's kind of like the procurement cycles and the budgeting cycles. Those are not as fast as threats evolve, right? And we can't react as fast from a state and local government level as fast as the threats that are evolving, and that people are doing things on their networks to add capabilities into their systems, but those systems have frailties as well, or vulnerabilities that can be taken advantage of by an actor. I remember one attack that I saw where a facilities management system was put online so that people could check like the temperature of the data center or whatever it is that was being managed. And it had default username and credentials and those kinds of things. And then that system was hacked, and now they're inside that environment. And fortunately for me, that was a red team exercise. It was an exercise that we were running, but it did show that how quickly you can go from a system that you thought was pretty secure, you add something to your environment to make it better for somebody, and then the next thing you know, that system's being compromised and creating problems for you. And I think that's going to happen just because of how much change actually occurs, and then the lack of cybersecurity skills that we have.
Yeah, well, and you and I both know that having managed cyber people of various levels of competency, that there's always going to be something that didn't get the default changed. Like, you just have to keep trying, right? So as a person who puts on their black hat, starts to like, okay, I know how we are as a community. There's going to be one thing, because there's so many things. There's going to be one thing that I'm going to find. I'm going to find a way in.
Yeah, absolutely. Given enough time and energy, right? They're going to find a way in.
Yeah.
Because the systems that you have on your environment today that you believe are secure, you're going to find a third-party library that's not secure. We have that vulnerability now, and now it's being taken advantage of, or your configuration changes, and now it's gone out of the configuration that you thought was secure. I mean, there's just so many things that happen on networks today.
Well, and even worse, like in the state of like nation state hackers, right? They're in there already. They're just waiting for a trade policy to be let go, or some sort of, international thing to happen that upsets them and says, okay, now it's like, we're going to take action, and that's where the gather information, decrypt later type of thing.
Yes.
Assuming that they're already in your network. So my last job in the Air Force, I was the mission support group commander for the Air Force Technical Application Center, which is the organization that is in charge of the global nuclear sensor network. So I was in charge of the networks that brought in all the nuclear information data globally from global sensors. Now, the assumption was made that we're probably already owned by China within those systems. So it becomes, now you're pulling back your layers, right? Layer 2 through 7. Like, what do we protect? What is the crown jewels? So, that data, and, you have to make an assumption at some point that probably a certain amount of your stuff is probably already owned. So, you need to take action.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a program I worked on in the military where we had like different, defense levels. And I can't remember what the defense level was anymore, but I remember that as we increased our cyber defense posture, we started closing down the who can get on the network and who was inside that closed network. And that way, just so we could control in and out and the integrity of our command and control systems the best we could, right?
Yeah, the original Zero Trust, right?
Yeah, the original Zero Trust. And just to put this in perspective for people, I think I was working on the system in 2000. I started working on the system in like 2008 or so, right? And it wasn't a new system at that time. It was all written in Perl, right? Which is a really old Unix Unix language. It was crazy. But anyways, the integrity of data, which we don't talk a lot about. We talk a lot about confidentiality. We talk a lot about availability, but we don't really talk about integrity of system data. And somewhat of what you're alluding to, that if you have sensor data and you're saying, hey, there's a nuclear sensor network that's out there that's collecting information, not knowing whether that system is owned or not is important. But I think it's also secondary to the integrity of the information that you're getting from that network.
I think, you're absolutely correct. The most dangerous thing is non-reputability, right? So we also had that concern when I was at the CAC with the air picture and radars. We had 8 radars that were operated by host nations, so not ours. And all that information was sent back to the Combined Air Operations Center over satellite. So was the air picture correct or not, right? So that was always a question that got asked, like, how can we be sure that nothing has been changed on it?
Yeah, and the reason for the system that I worked on was exactly the same kind of thing. It was like a red team exercise. They injected information into a command and control system that showed not truth things on the the map. And those are, the integrity of that information, especially in military environments, is incredibly critical to our nation's defense and such, right? So there's lots of stuff to consider for sure. Well, I want to talk a little bit about couple of other things. One of the things that I think we should talk about is your mentoring through the Armed Services Arts Partnership.
Yeah, so great organization.
Okay.
ASAP. I would have loved it on the comedy boot camp, but what had happened was I had pretty significant foot and ankle surgery. So I was kind of out of commission for a bit. And I was like, I have to do something with my time. I feel like it was pretty depressing, actually. Because I'd just gotten back from deployment in Afghanistan, and I found this organization. I was like, okay, well, you could always be better at public speaking. Like me talking to you it's out of my comfort zone. This is not what communications people do. I always joke that communicators are notoriously bad communicators. So I was like, okay, maybe this will help me. So I took one of their courses. I did it's a storytelling, sort of like the Moth podcast. You go on stage, you tell your story without notes. And after I did that, they brought me on as a mentor to others. So I would say the organization helped me more than I helped them, kind of deal. They loosely base who's eligible to take these classes, right? You could be a spouse, a child, a caregiver to a veteran. I'm pretty sure if your next door neighbor was a veteran, they'd be like, come on in. They're very inclusive in who they admit to these programs. The comedy boot camp that they have is, if you ever get a chance to go to one of the shows, they have them in DC all the time. If you're a veteran and you go to one of these shows, you'll totally get it. We have kind of a skewed sense of humor. I'm pretty sure you probably saw that in Bahrain. My civilian counterparts kind of scratch their head and go, oh, that's not funny, but I don't know. It's kind of funny. But it's a wonderful program. And if you don't support by going to see a show, maybe look them up and support via the internet or via donating through there. It's a really, really great program. They do a lot of good. They work out at Walter Reed, getting folks to, that maybe need to offload some of their story in some way. So they help them sort through those ideas.
For our listeners who are military veterans considering a transition into cybersecurity, what advice would you give them about moving into the corporate tech world?
So if you're not already a cybersecurity person in uniform, but you want to transition not just out of the military, but into cybersecurity, I would tell you that you know more than you already do, or than you think you do. You know how to lead under pressure. You know how to triage. You know how to calculate risk. You know how to operate with mission focus. Those are the same skills that cybersecurity demands, right? You just have to learn the frameworks, NIST, MITRE ATT&CK framework, the zero trust, pursue the certificates, which you know how to do because you have done all your PME. You have done a lot of classes that are very dry and obviously made it through, tech school and basic. Do those programs. They'll help you to do that. But most importantly, translating your story into your new cybersecurity story. And I think that's what's really hard for veterans to do, is to understand that the things they've done in uniform and how to articulate that to translate to how it fits into the civilian community. So I would say take stock of what you've already done. Don't throw it away because it's important. And what you've already done is important. You just have to do the certifications and school book stuff, and you'll be a valuable asset to any commercial company out there.
Absolutely. Definitely have a lot of trust and faith in what you've been doing the last, 5, 10, 20 years that you've been in the military. And then, and then today I know that there's so many more resources that are available for folks that are transitioning. I talked to someone else that transitioned from military, and they were talking about using ChatGPT to help them translate their experience into civilian talk. And so maybe that's another approach, right? Because I think that, all the acronyms and everything that you do and how that may be communicated in the military, there's not a parallel. I think it's the same skills, right? And like you said, very valuable skills. And they're not all technical. Not everything that we need to do in cyber is technical. Some of it is very much risk calculation, how to think about risk and, how to lead under pressure, right? Because, sometimes people that have technology backgrounds actually get in the way of an incident response. You kind of want someone that's going to just say, hey, let me use a framework, get through the framework and lead through that incident. As an example, very valuable. But again, I think the hard part is how do you communicate to that civilian counterpart how your experience helps their organization, right? And I think that's the hard part.
And I would say that my current job, I wasn't really very good at that. They hired me because they just hired me, right? And then we figured out what I could do. And so that kind of translates into my job. My job was a little bit created. But I do advise internally to the company, their current FedRAMP bid, which now they're in FedRAMP in process finalization. So we're weeks away from getting authorized, to advising on what press releases should say, what language they should use, to meeting with clients and translating requests for proposals type of things. So the traditional BD. But I think my company took a leap of faith in hiring this person, and they've let me actually define what I know how to do. What I was doing for the military, I've then kind of I recognize this, I can do this. So I would say I got lucky, but having that ChatGPT resource is great. Make sure you read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't let the hallucinations tell you.
You got to love ChatGPT for what it is.
Absolutely.
Which is a writing partner.
A partner. I like the way you said that.
Partner.
Yeah. So, and here's my final question, and it's a bit unconventional. You're one of the few people I know who could probably execute a perfect triple axel and then go defend a federal network from nation state actors. If you had to choose one skill from figure skating that's made you a better at cybersecurity, what would it be?
So never had a triple axel. I had 2 triples, which is a triple toe loop and a triple sow cow. Those were my 2 triples, which was pretty good for the late 80s. But as far as what has taught me, so figure skating taught me a lot of things that served me well in my military career and serves me well in cybersecurity. one of those things is failure. You got to talk about failure and resilience and the ability to continue, right? So being able to show up every day, and some days are not going to be good. Let's just face it. Some days are going to be really bad, especially in cybersecurity. Not a good day. But being able to show up every day, day after day, and learning from your mistakes and learning from what could have been done better. Always asking yourself, what could I have done differently for a better outcome? And then competing with yourself, not competing with others, but competing with yourself to raise that bar every day. So that was one of the critical things. I think you shouldn't discount competition, but I really think when you compete with other people, you limit yourself. You should compete with yourself to be better at your craft, right? So that's one of the things. So that failure part. The other thing is risk calculation. When you are in competition and you like, is it worth it for me to take this risk? Like, do I take this risk or do I just play it safe on this aspect today? And that's one of those things where prioritizing and risk calculation, constantly prioritizing and reprioritizing and calculating the risk of not doing this here and not doing this there type of thing. So I think being able to deal with failure, being able to have that resiliency to compete with yourself and get better every day. Some days I don't get better. Some days I think I get worse, but, being able to have that self-reflection on the incident at large, and what was your role and taking responsibility for the performance, right? So, you might have a team, but ultimately if it's your team, you are responsible. It doesn't matter that A1C such and such did X, Y, and Z or misconfigured something. It's still your responsibility. And so how do you address that? Do you just say, oh yeah, my bad? Or do you work with your team to understand how it happened? I think that's a big part of it is the how. I'm always asking how. I'm always asking, what is my role? Like, how can I do better? And after our conversation here, I'll probably go back and be like, okay, how could I have done this better? I'll probably peel back that onion and be like, oh gosh,
I definitely love your resilience, the way that you think about failure and resilience and competing with yourself. And I think that's a huge, great skill to have inside cyber because we are going to fail. All right. The system is going to fail. Often you're in organizations that have so many people with so many things going on that there is going to be a failure. And whether it's your failure or someone else's failure, it doesn't really matter. It's just something you have to react to.
Right.
And that's okay, right? And I think hinders a lot of young people is that they worry that they failed. And it's not really so much that you failed, but the second part that you said is like, what did you learn from that failure, right? And then what is it that you're going to do to make it better in the future? And sometimes those things are in your control and sometimes they're not in your control. And, part of it is just figuring out, is this something, that you want to control? And that's probably the leadership path. But if you start thinking, this is something I want to have responsibility for and control, then you're probably on a leadership path at some point in time. But yeah. For sure, I think that the resilience, failure, how do you learn from failures? Those are some great learnings from your figure skating, right?
From my figure skating days. Yeah. And, and just one note on that too, is if you're not failing, then you're not in the right grade. Like if you don't fail, you're not doing things hard enough.
Agreed. I love that. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, right? It's
right. 100%. Because there's going to be, if you show me anybody who's successful at what they do, and they will tell you they failed more than they succeeded.
100% agree with you. 100% agree. Thank you for being on the Be Fearless podcast, Sarah. It was great talking to you.
It was a wonderful conversation. And please, if anybody wants to reach out to me for any reason, please reach out.
Thanks. Bye.